Dr. Vethkara had studied primitive species for 40 cycles. She had seen creatures fight for food. She had watched animals run from fire. She had documented how living things always tried to stay alive. Every species in the consortium's database followed the same basic rule: avoid danger, survive longer. It was simple logic that governed all life in the known galaxy. Then she found Earth, and everything she knew stopped making sense. Her research vessel, the Quiet Observer, had been circling the blue planet for 3 local months. The ship stayed hidden behind a light-bending field that made it invisible to human technology. Vethkara's mission was simple: watch the humans, learn about them, report back to the Consortium Science Institute. At first, the work seemed routine. Humans were social creatures. They built shelters and formed communities. They cared for their young and created complex communication systems. All of this matched patterns Vethkara had seen in dozens of other developing species. Then she witnessed the volcano incident. Her assistant, Tan, had been the first to notice it. He called Vethkara to the observation deck with urgency in his voice. She found him staring at the display screen, his 4 eyes blinking in confusion. On the screen, a human stood at the edge of a volcanic fissure. The ground around the human glowed orange with heat. Toxic gases rose from cracks in the rock. The temperature readings showed numbers that would kill most carbon-based life forms within minutes. The human was wearing a protective suit, but it was thin. Far too thin for the environment. Vethkara could see the material straining against the heat. Warning indicators on her console showed that the suit's integrity was already failing in several places. And yet the human moved closer to the edge. "What is it doing?" Tan asked. His translator made his words sound flat, but Vethkara could hear the fear underneath. She watched as the human lowered a long metal instrument into the fissure. The human held the tool with steady hands, despite the fact that the protective gloves were starting to smoke. Another human stood several meters back, shouting something that the translation software rendered as encouragement. "It appears to be collecting samples," Vethkara said slowly, "from inside the volcanic opening, but it will die." "Yes, the probability is quite high." They watched in silence as the human pulled the instrument back up. The tool was glowing red from the heat. The human quickly placed it into a container, sealed it, and then stepped back from the edge. The human pulled off the damaged gloves and examined its hands. Even from orbit, Vethkara could see the burns on the pink skin. The human laughed. Vethkara replayed the audio 3 times to make sure she understood correctly. The human was injured. The human had nearly died. And the human was laughing with what the translation software called joy. "I do not understand," Tan said. "Neither do I," Vethkara admitted. "But I intend to." Over the following weeks, Vethkara changed the focus of her research. She had originally planned to study human social structures and technological development. Now she focused on something else entirely. She wanted to understand why humans kept putting themselves in danger on purpose. The examples came quickly, and each one was more confusing than the last. She watched humans dive into the deepest parts of their ocean. They used small vessels that creaked and groaned under the water pressure. The vessels were not strong enough for the depths they reached. Every journey was a gamble between discovery and death. Yet humans kept going deeper, kept pushing the limits of their machines. She watched humans climb frozen mountains where the air was too thin to breathe properly. They carried heavy equipment on their backs and moved slowly through snow and ice. Many of them died on these mountains. The humans knew this before they started climbing. They climbed anyway. She watched humans strap themselves to machines that exploded with controlled fire and shot them into the sky. These humans wanted to leave their planet and explore the emptiness beyond. The machines failed often. Humans died in balls of flame. Other humans studied the failures, built new machines, and climbed back on top of more explosives. She watched humans inject themselves with diseases. On purpose. They would take a sickness, make it weaker, and then put it into their own bodies. They did this to understand how their bodies fought infection. Many of these experiments ended badly. The humans kept experimenting. One case fascinated Vethkara more than any other. She discovered records of a human who had studied the diseases in human digestive systems. This human had a theory about what caused certain illnesses. Other humans did not believe the theory. So this human grew dangerous bacteria in a container and then drank it. The human became very sick. The human almost died. But the human had proven the theory correct. He poisoned himself, Tan said when Vethkara showed him the record. He could have tested the theory on animals first. He could have found safer methods. Instead, he drank poison to prove a point. And then he received one of their highest scientific honors, Vethkara added. The other humans considered him a hero. Tan's membranes flushed with the color of distress. This species is insane. Vethkara considered this carefully. It was an easy conclusion to reach. Humans did things that looked completely irrational. They took risks that no sensible creature would take. They died in ways that could have been easily avoided. But the more Vethkara studied them, the less she believed that madness explained their behavior. There was a pattern to human risk-taking. It was not random. Humans did not simply throw themselves at danger for no reason. They had a question first. Always a question. What is inside the volcano? How deep is the ocean? What happens if we go higher than the air allows? Can we survive beyond our world? How does this disease work? Humans formed questions about things they did not understand. Then they answered those questions by putting themselves in harm's way. They did not wait for safe methods. They did not search for risk-free approaches. They accepted that knowledge sometimes required suffering, and they suffered willingly. It is not madness, Vethkara said one evening as she compiled her notes. It is something else. Something I do not have a word for. What do you mean? She turned to face Tan fully, all 6 of her eyes focusing on him. Every species we have ever studied protects itself first. Survival is the highest priority. Knowledge is valuable only if it does not threaten survival. Humans reverse this equation. They treat knowledge as more important than their own safety. They sacrifice themselves to learn things. That is still madness, Tan said stubbornly. Perhaps. But consider this. Vethkara gestured at the data floating around them. Humans have existed as a technological species for only a tiny fraction of the time other species have. Yet their scientific advancement is remarkably fast. Faster than almost any species in our database. Tan was quiet for a moment. You think the two things are connected. I think that when a species is willing to die for answers, they find those answers more quickly. We spend generations developing safe testing methods. We calculate risks and avoid anything that seems too dangerous. Humans simply go. They accept the cost and move forward. She saved her notes and began drafting her preliminary report to the consortium. She chose her words carefully, knowing that her colleagues would find her conclusions difficult to believe. Humanity is not a reckless species, she wrote. They are a devoted one. They have made a collective decision, perhaps without even realizing it, that knowledge is worth more than individual lives. This makes them unpredictable by our standards. It also makes them fast. She paused, considering how to end the report. I recommend extreme caution in any future dealings with this species, she continued. Not because they are hostile. In fact, they seem remarkably friendly and curious about the universe around them. But they process danger differently than any species we have encountered before. They do not avoid risk. They run toward it. She sent the report and turned back to the observation screen. Below her, the blue planet turned slowly in the darkness. Somewhere down there, humans were already preparing their next dangerous experiment. They were climbing another mountain, diving into another ocean, building another machine that might kill them, and they would keep doing it. Vethkara realized until they had answered every question they could think of, no matter how many of them died along the way. The consortium's formal first contact delegation arrived at Earth 18 cycles after Vethkara sent her original report. By then, her research on human behavior had grown into the most extensive study the Science Institute had ever conducted on a single species. She had filled thousands of pages with observations, theories, and warnings. The consortium had read all of it carefully before deciding to make contact. Ambassador Saleth led the delegation. He was a career diplomat who had successfully introduced the Pari consortium to 11 different species across 3 galactic sectors. He was patient, thoughtful, and extremely good at his job. He had studied Vethkara's research thoroughly and felt prepared for anything the humans might do. He was wrong. Of course, the landing went smoothly. Saleth's vessel descended through Earth's atmosphere and settled in a location that the human governments had designated for the meeting. Large crowds of humans gathered behind barriers to watch the ship arrive. Saleth noted that many of them seemed excited rather than afraid. Some were even holding signs with messages of welcome. This was unusual. Most species showed fear when encountering more advanced civilizations for the first time. Humans appeared to have skipped that step entirely. The delegation exited the ship and was greeted by a group of human officials. Saleth found humans somewhat difficult to read at first. Their faces had a limited range of expressions compared to his own species, and they relied heavily on subtle changes in vocal tone to communicate emotion. But he had practiced with recordings, and he felt confident in his ability to interpret their body language. The formal ceremonies took several hours. There were speeches, exchanges of gifts, and many questions from both sides. Saleth answered everything as carefully as he could, aware that every word would shape humanity's understanding of the wider galaxy. The human leaders seemed genuinely interested in peaceful relations, which was encouraging. Then he met Dr. Margaret Chundot. She was not part of the official welcoming committee. She was a scientist who had been invited to observe the proceedings because of her expertise in what the humans called xenobiology, the study of life beyond Earth. She had dedicated her entire career to a field that had, until that morning, been purely theoretical. Saleth noticed her during a break in the formal events. She was standing near the edge of the human delegation, watching everything with intense focus. Unlike the politicians and officials around her, she did not seem interested in the diplomatic aspects of the meeting. She kept looking at Saleth and his colleagues with an expression he eventually identified as hunger, not hunger for food. He realized hunger for knowledge when she approached him during a reception event. She did not waste time with small talk. Ambassador, I would like to request permission to collect biological samples from members of your delegation, she said. Her voice was calm and professional, but her eyes were almost glowing with excitement. Saleth was momentarily speechless. They had been on the planet for less than one standard day, and this human was already asking to study them biologically. That is a somewhat unusual request so early in our contact, he managed to say. I understand, Margaret said, but we do not know how long your visit will last, and this opportunity is too valuable to waste. Every moment I spend not studying your species is a moment of potential discovery lost. Saleth consulted with his team through the translation implant in his head. Vethkara, who had joined the delegation as a human behavior specialist, responded almost immediately. This is normal for them, she said. They move quickly. They do not wait when knowledge is available. Saleth considered the request more carefully. There were protocols for this kind of situation. Sharing biological information was a sensitive matter, and there were risks involved in allowing a primitive species to study consortium physiology, but there were also opportunities. Humans learned quickly, according to Vethkaris research. If they were given access to information about consortium biology, they might develop useful medical technologies faster than expected. The consortium had always found value in helping new species advance. I would be willing to discuss this possibility, Selaith said. However, I should warn you that some of our biological processes are quite different from yours. The procedures for collecting samples might be uncomfortable for humans. Margaret's expression did not change. What kind of discomfort? Our vessel uses a decontamination process that involves energy frequencies your body has never been exposed to. The radiation from our home star is very different from yours. To enter the section of our ship where samples could be safely collected, you would need to undergo this decontamination. For humans, the process would likely cause significant pain. There might also be temporary damage to your sensory organs and skin. He expected her to hesitate. He expected her to ask questions about safety, about recovery time, about long-term effects. He expected her to suggest that the consortium scientists come to her instead, in a human facility designed for human comfort. Instead, she started rolling up her sleeve. "How do we begin?" she asked. Selaith stared at her for a long moment. "Dr. Chun, I am not sure you understand what I am describing. The decontamination process is designed for species that evolved under different conditions than yours. Your body will interpret the energy as an attack. You will experience burning sensations, temporary blindness, and your outer skin layer will likely shed over several of your days." "That sounds unpleasant," Margaret agreed. "But not permanent. I will recover. The probability of full recovery is high, yes. But the experience itself will be quite painful. I have experienced pain before." She finished rolling up her sleeve and looked at him directly. "Ambassador, I have spent my entire life studying the possibility of life beyond Earth. I wrote papers that my colleagues called fantasy. I built detection equipment that found nothing for 20 years. I watched my field become a joke to serious scientists. And now you are here, standing in front of me, and you are telling me that I can learn something real about your biology if I am willing to be uncomfortable for a few days." She held up her bare arm. "This is not a difficult decision," she said. "Show me where to go." Selaith turned to Vethkara, who was watching the exchange with an expression that mixed resignation with admiration. "This is exactly what my research predicted," Vethkara said through the implant. "She has a question. She is willing to suffer to answer it. It is simply how they operate." Selaith considered refusing. Protocol suggested that he should. Exposing a primitive species member to consortium technology so soon after first contact was risky. If something went wrong, if she died, it could damage relations between the two civilizations permanently. But he also understood something about the moment. Margaret Chen was not acting on impulse. She had calculated the risks and decided that they were acceptable. She was making a choice, the same choice her species had been making for thousands of years. Whenever they climbed a dangerous mountain or sailed an unknown ocean. If he refused her, he would be saying that her choice did not matter. He would be telling her that the consortium knew better than she did what risks she should take. And based on everything Vethkara had taught him about humans, that was the worst message he could possibly send. "Very well," he said. "Please follow me." Margaret Chen became the first human to undergo consortium. Decontamination 3 hours after first contact was officially established. The process lasted approximately 6 minutes. She screamed for most of it. When it was over, she could not see properly. Her skin had turned an angry red color and was already beginning to peel. She was shaking from pain and shock. One of the human doctors who had accompanied the delegation wanted to take her to a hospital immediately. Margaret refused to leave until she had collected her samples She worked for another. 2 hours with bandages on her hands and dark coverings over her damaged eyes. Her movements were slow and careful, but she did not stop. She asked questions constantly, recording everything Saleith and his team told her. She took tissue samples, fluid samples, and readings with every instrument she had brought. When she finally agreed to seek medical treatment, she was smiling despite the visible pain on her face. "This was worth it," she told Saleith before she left. "I do not expect you to understand why, but I need you to know that. This was absolutely worth it." Saleith watched her go, carried by her colleagues to a waiting vehicle. He stood in silence for a long time afterward. "You were right," he told Vethkar eventually. "I read your reports. I thought I understood, but I did not really understand until now." "No one does," Vethkar replied. "Not until they see it themselves." 3 days later, Margaret Chun published her findings. Her paper included a detailed analysis of consortium biology, recommendations for future human-alien medical protocols, and a section she titled Personal Observations on the Decontamination Process. In that section, she described her symptoms with clinical precision: the burning, the blindness, the way her skin had shed in patches for days afterward. She included a footnote at the end, thanking Ambassador Saleith for what she called his excellent bedside manner during the screaming. The paper became the most read scientific document in human history. And within weeks, hundreds of other human scientists were asking how they could volunteer for similar experiences. The consortium's High Council met in emergency session when they learned about the Mars Colonial Initiative. It had been 20 cycles since first contact. In that time, humanity had changed dramatically. They now had regular communication with the consortium. They had begun trading technology and ideas. They had sent representatives to distant worlds and hosted visitors from a dozen different species. But they had also started planning something that made the entire council deeply uncomfortable. Humans wanted to colonize Mars. This was not unusual by itself. Many species eventually expanded beyond their home worlds. The consortium encouraged this kind of development. More worlds meant more resources, more diversity, more strength for the galactic community. What made the Mars Colonial Initiative different was the timeline. Humans did not want to wait until they had perfected the technology. They did not want to spend generations testing and refining their methods. They wanted to go now with the equipment they had, knowing that it was not good enough to guarantee survival. The colony ship would carry 400 humans on a journey that would take 9 local months. Communication with Earth would take between 4 and 20 minutes depending on orbital positions. If something went wrong, help could not arrive for at least 6 additional months. The survival probability for the first colonists was estimated at 60%. Humans knew this number. They had calculated it themselves, with brutal honesty about their technological limitations. And 400 of them had volunteered anyway. The waiting list for future missions contained over 200,000 names. "They are sending their young," Counselor Venn said, staring at the human data with something like horror. "They're scientists. They're engineers. They're doctors. The best minds of their generation. They are putting all of them on a ship that has a 40% chance of killing everyone aboard. The humans call it acceptable risk," another counselor said. "They believe the potential rewards outweigh the potential losses." What rewards? Mars is a dead world. Frozen, irradiated, airless. There are no resources there that humans cannot find more easily elsewhere. There is no strategic value. The entire project serves no practical purpose except to prove that humans can survive in a place that does not want them. The council fell silent. That was exactly the point, of course. Humans were not going to Mars because they needed to. They were going because they wanted to know if they could. Vethkara had been invited to address the council. She stood now in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the most powerful beings in the consortium. Her research on humanity had made her famous across the galaxy. Other species used her work to prepare for their own contact with humans. Her papers were required reading for any diplomat or scientist who expected to interact with Earth. "You are still thinking of this as recklessness," she said calmly. "After 20 cycles of studying humans, I can tell you with certainty that it is not." Counselor Venn made a sound of frustration. "Ben, what is it? How can a species knowingly send its most valuable members to die on a frozen rock? How can they call this progress?" Vethkara activated a display screen and began showing images from human history. The images were old, taken from human records that went back thousands of their years. "This is a human sailing vessel," she said. "It was built approximately 500 of their years ago. Humans use ships like this to cross their largest ocean. The journey took months. The survival rate was poor. Storms, disease, and starvation killed many of them. They knew the risks before they left. They went anyway." She changed the image. Now the screen showed a human standing on top of a tall mountain, bundled in thick clothing against the cold. "This is one of the highest points on the human planet. The air at this altitude is too thin for human lungs. The cold is severe enough to kill within hours. Hundreds of humans have died trying to reach this peak. More than 5,000 have succeeded. They climb because they want to know if they can. The bodies of those who failed are still on the mountain, frozen in place, visible to everyone who passes." Another image. This one showed a group of humans in bulky white suits standing on a gray surface. Behind them, Earth hung in a black sky. This is the human moon. Humans reached it less than a century after learning to fly. The journey was made in a vessel that had less computing power than a basic consortium communication device. The life support systems were primitive. The landing was performed manually because the guidance computers had failed. At any moment, the humans could have died. They completed their mission anyway. Vethkara turned off the display and faced the council directly. "Humans have a phrase that I believe explains their behavior. They say that a person must have skin in the game. It means that knowledge and understanding are only valid if someone has paid a real price for them. Theories that cost nothing are worth nothing. Ideas that involve no sacrifice have no weight." She paused to let this sink in. When a human says they believe something will work, they mean they are willing to die proving it. This is not metaphor. This is literal. They test their ideas on themselves. Their researchers eat unknown plants. Their doctors inject experimental medicines. Their engineers ride untested machines. They accept the possibility of death because they believe that is what makes their discoveries real. Counselor Venn shifted uncomfortably. "This seems like a very inefficient way to advance scientifically. Many of them must die for reasons that could have been avoided." "Yes, many do. The humans mourn them and then continue the research. The ones who die are not considered failures. They are considered heroes. Their names are remembered. Their sacrifices are honored. And others step forward to take their places. But why? Why accept such losses when safer methods exist?" Vethkara considered the question carefully. It was the same question she had been asked many times over the cycles. She had tried many different explanations. Some audiences understood. Many did not. "I believe it is because humans trust knowledge that costs something more than knowledge that is free," she said finally. "They have learned, through long experience, that easy answers are often wrong, that comfortable theories frequently fail, that the universe does not give up its secrets willingly, so they pay the price up front. They put their own bodies on the line. They make themselves vulnerable in order to earn the right to claim understanding. She gestured toward the data about the Mars Initiative. They are going to Mars because it is hard, because it will hurt, because some of them will die, and because the knowledge gained from that suffering will be knowledge they can trust completely. Not theory, not speculation. Truth, paid for in human lives. The council was quiet for a long time. Finally, Councilor Venn spoke again. Her voice was softer now, thoughtful rather than frustrated. The first human to die on Mars. What will happen? Will the colony fail? Will they abandon the project? Vethkara shook her head slowly. No. The first human to die on Mars will be honored beyond almost anyone else in their history. Their name will be taught to children. Songs will be written about them. Monuments will be built. And immediately afterward, 1,000 more humans will volunteer to follow them. The death will not be seen as a reason to stop. It will be seen as proof that the goal is worth pursuing. She looked around the chamber at the assembled leaders. You asked what kind of species humans are. I have spent 20 cycles trying to answer that question. This is what I have learned. They are not reckless. They are not suicidal. They are devoted. Devoted to discovery in a way that we do not fully understand. They have decided, as a species, that knowledge is sacred. Sacred enough to suffer for. Sacred enough to die for. And they will continue acting on this belief until they have answered every question they can imagine. Councilor Venn nodded slowly. And this makes them dangerous? It makes them fast. While we calculate risks and develop safe methods, they go. While we debate and analyze, they discover. While we protect our best minds, they send them into danger. Our caution has served us well for millions of cycles. But we have also become slow, predictable, comfortable. She paused. Humans are none of these things. And in just a few hundred of their years, they have advanced further than species that have existed for millennia. This is not despite their willingness to risk death for knowledge. It is because of it. The Council approved a new classification for humanity that day. Species of scientific concern, category unprecedented. It was the first time this category had ever been used. It meant that humans were not considered dangerous in the traditional sense, but they were also not considered safe. Alongside the classification, the Council added a note. The note had been written by Vethkara, and she had taken a long time choosing the words carefully. Do not underestimate beings who consider death an acceptable research cost. Do not assume they will behave as other species do. Do not expect them to avoid risks that seem obvious to us. And do not make the mistake of thinking that their short lives make them weak. They have achieved more in a few centuries than most species achieve in ages. They have done this by paying prices we would never accept. And they show no signs of slowing down. When humans say they are willing to die for knowledge, they mean it. And this makes them the most important species we have encountered in a very long time. T.